Because you're my wife. You always do things like this.
I am a distracting influence. Yay!
You're a gerbil. Hey, everybody. It's Memorial Day. It's also a commissioner here with the Week 21 review. And we actually had a pretty interesting week. Fairly... Yeah, it is an odd topic, Chris. So basically, the wife has been listening to a lot of true crime podcasts. I've always been a huge fan of true crime podcasts or even shows like, what is it called? Forensic Files. Always been one of my favorite ones. So that's what exactly we're talking about, just to clarify, just so that way I don't get called the cops on, I guess, is probably a good way of doing it.
Hey, what?
Clarifying for Chris because he's like odd topic.
I'm just yelling at John that if I get murdered, he better love me as much as Roman Pulaski loved his wife. That's all.
Yeah, basically. Anyways.
Which, he was a pretty shitty husband, but I want you to be that paranoid.
So you want me to be shitty too?
I mean, I want you to go out and fuck a bunch of women. But I want you to be paranoid of everybody and immediately accuse all your friends of murdering me.
Dork. Anyways, we've got a lot on the show today. Actually, we've got a new segment that I will be putting in here as well. I kind of wanted to keep it a secret up until now. So we'll get into that later in the show. You'll see where it fits in. And I actually need to make sure I have it where I thought it would make sense. So a lot has actually changed over this last week, and it is where I want it to be. Obviously, Yankees are still doing pretty well in terms of real life. We'll always go over the major league standings just because baseball is one where it's a long season. You may not always pay attention to your own team. But quickly browsing, I mean, the Yankees are at the top of the AL East, surprisingly 17 games above 500, even with all the injuries they've sustained. But when you get to beat up on the Orioles as much as they do, obviously it's going to happen. You've got the Twins, surprisingly 20 games above 500, with the Cleveland Indians sitting at 26 and 26, the pure 500 mark. And in the AL West, no surprise, the Astros are dominating. Angels are sitting near the bottom of the pack, which is kind of surprising. Unfortunately, even though with Trout and Ohtani, the team still has a lot of work to be done. On the NL side, the NL East is led by the Phillies, and the Braves are only a couple of games behind. You've got the Mets, Nationals, and then Marlins. Nationals are sitting so far out, which is pretty surprising considering they added Corbin, and obviously they have Juan Soto for a full year, and that team should be better than what they are. They might need a new manager. They might need something. They've got to find a spark there. And you've got the NL Central, which is really, really interesting right now. Cubs lead it as they're 9 games over 500. Brewers have 3 more losses than the Cubs. They've played a few extra games, so they'll have that rest down the road. And then the Pirates are actually just above 500. And the NL West should be no surprise. Dodgers are running away with it as they are 35 and 18. So why don't we get into today's show? And I'm really excited about this. Hard week for me. Obviously, many people may know, may not know, but we'll get into the scores. We'll get into who won, who lost. Not a big deal. If I can actually get this thing to run the way I'd like it to. Application window. There we go. But we do have some news to go over. No history for today. Obviously, today being Memorial Day. The fact that we get to live the lives we do is pretty fantastic. And I don't have a whole lot to say, but I mean, Memorial Day should be for the ones who fought, and I've had a lot of veterans in my family, on my family side, my wife's family side as well. So we've talked to them today, been busy with that. So biggest thing, here's This Week in Baseball. Matt Kemp actually has found a new home in New York with the Mets. He did sign a minor league deal earlier today. Obviously, whether he makes it back to MLB will be a big question mark. He might not. But the Mets are always filled with injuries and do have a spot in the outfield when you really look at it. Obviously, Jeff McNeil is injured right now. He can play outfield, but you've got Michael Conforto. He may make it back this year. Who knows? But one of the interesting things that I found when looking into stats is Trout is second in the league in OBP. He's got a 456 on-base percentage at this point. He's only behind Cody Bellinger, who sits at 470, but he has an average nearly 100 points lower. So Bellinger is sitting at 386. Trout is sitting at 288. That's almost a 200 full point mark between his average and his on base. I mean, Trout is just chugging along, being the ridiculous player. And the fact that he's got an on base of 45% when he's hitting, his average is only sitting at 288. And then the Braves and Mariners made an odd trade in real life in the fact of Jesse Biddle and Arodys Vizcaíno going to Seattle in trade for Anthony Swarzak. Really not much discussed on this. It gives a different bullpen piece to the Atlanta Braves. They have an idea of maybe Swarzak can be their closer because they did option AJ Minter down to the minors. They've had a big, obviously, hole in that bullpen. Maybe they sign Kimbrel in the end, but Swarzak maybe fills that hole for now. Moving on, individual league leaders, not a whole lot has really changed, especially on offense. You can see here, I'm not going to read all these names. We've seen them, especially in terms of counting stats. They tend to sit there for the same. Bellinger running the league in almost everything in terms of power, batting average, absolutely whatever big change he made to his swing this offseason, it's paid off. Yelich continues to have that hot streak that he played with in the second half of 2018. It's clearly continued into 2019 as we're not even out of May yet, and he has 21 home runs for the Milwaukee Brewers and Fantasy Braves. If only Sean could see what his work did for him to obtain Yelich this offseason. And then once again, the Rockies have Adalberto Mondesi with 18 steals on the year, leading the league there. Now, here's where we had a few changes in terms of league leaders. The last 4 weeks, it has been Zach Greinke all by himself for the most part. This week, Justin Verlander made that list with 10 quality starts as well. Newly acquired by the Chicago White Sox in fantasy, trying to add to that rotation because guys like Trevor Bauer and Eduardo Rodriguez have been absolute trash this year, unfortunately. So trying to bolster that rotation if possible. Walks allowed continues to belong to Hyunjin Ryu. 4 walks in 65 innings, pinpoint control, which is absolutely nasty, and he's still doing really well when it comes to strikeouts. And I actually did not change the name on here. So quick thing, as I'll do this real quick, because strikeouts still belongs to Garrett Cole, but when it comes, and ERA to Hyunjin Ryu, but WHIP does belong to Justin Verlander at .744, and I think he's only about .002 points away from Hyunjin Ryu. Not a big deal, really just absolutely close between these two. Fun to watch them both. Sorry for that quick edit on the fly there. And then Kirby Yates, offseason acquisition for the Colorado Rockies, 7th week straight, acquired 3 more saves this week, so pretty close there. And great job by Keith noticing that talent and pushing all the chips in this year. Moving on to the injured reserve, or I prefer injured reserve. I always will. Not a whole lot to go along with here. I'm just going to go over the big names. David Peralta for the Braves has an AC joint issue. He'll be out on the 10-day injured list. Tyler Glasnow for the Chicago White Sox was moved to the 60-day injured list. Originally presumed to be a 4 to 6 week injury. Sounds like that was a little bit optimistic, but still will be back at some point this season. Sounds like the 6 to 8 week mark will probably be a better shot for him. And then, of course, the Colorado Rockies, even with all these injuries, they are still sitting in 2nd place on the year. George Springer dealing with a hamstring issue. Chris Davis recently hit the injured list as well. And when it comes to it, Alex Verdugo, a guy that I really like going into this year and has been surprisingly really good, is dealing with a back issue, and he's day-to-day. For the Miami Marlins, they did have Kyle Seager and Michael Conforto return from the injured list recently. And then the Twins and Yankees really wrapped this one up with a couple of pitchers dealing with injuries. Matt Harvey and Luke Weaver, between those two, both land on the injured list. And then Chris Bryant dealing with an upper body injury. He's day-to-day. And what it is, they haven't said that it's a concussion. I'm sure they don't want to say that. It almost feels like hockey, like, hey, upper body. We don't want to be specific on what it is because you never know how long something like that could hold him out. So nothing too great, not any big updates as well. So we'll get to that. Fire and ice. I'm ready for this one. So on the fire side, we've had some changes, some not. And when it comes down to it, two new names for the fire side of batting. We have outfielder Max Kepler, who has absolutely, the power hasn't been crazy, but the fact that he's been just hard to get out with a 415 average, an RBI per day, and a run per day as well. When you're getting a run and an RBI per day, that's great. And it is what it is. 1.319 OPS as well. Excellent, excellent performance out of Kepler, and a big part of that Twins offense that has been just dominating the American League. And then you've got second baseman and shortstop Gleyber Torres of the New York Yankees, with where not so much on the counting stats or the average, but the power has been fantastic for him. At 8 home runs, and a lot of them coming against the Baltimore Orioles, of course, but you're going to find those stretches, especially against bad teams like that. And 304 average, great for the past 14 days. Always hard to keep those streaks alive, but doing really, really well. And then a name that was on here last week that continues to be there is starting pitcher Brandon Woodruff. I believed in him going into this year. I didn't believe in him this much, but he has been absolutely just in the zone. Excellent performances. As you can see, 3 quality starts spanning over 22 innings with 21 strikeouts and a 1.23 ERA. Obviously not gaudy strikeout numbers in terms of it, but almost 9 Ks per 9, a batter an inning, and he's limiting runs. He's not getting killed with free passes either. And then a name that obviously deserves to be on here is Justin Verlander. 3 quality starts for him as well. Same amount of innings pitched as Woodruff. Couple less walks, a few more strikeouts. It's what we expect of Verlander to go along with a 2.05 ERA. Now on the ice side of things, it's a few names that I hate to see on here because they belong to me. One person that I've never been a huge fan of is shortstop Ahmed Rosario, though. Only 4 runs, 2 home runs, and 3 RBIs for him over the past 14 days. Has not been able to swing the bat well, a low average, low OPS, just not hitting the ball well at all, not even hitting it hard. And then a name I was surprised to see on here was Andrew Benintendi, with 3 runs in the past 14 days, only 2 RBIs, and an average close to the Mendoza line. It's absolute trash. Hard to see him perform like this. It's a guy that a lot of people thought he could take the step up this year and be a 20 home run, 25 stolen base guy, as he's yet to be able to find that plateau, but not a great stretch for him these last 2 weeks. And then somebody who was on here last week is starting pitcher Trevor Bauer. The struggles continue for him, once again allowing 4 home runs in the past 14 days, which would be 3 starts, 2 1-1. For whatever reason, the long ball has killed him this year. He's getting absolutely hammered, and hopefully he can turn it around. If not, I don't know what I'm going to do with him. He may be a guy to move at some point this year because of his potential, but we saw what he could do last year, and who knew that this explosion was coming from him. And then another guy that was healthy in the offseason that I expected to be better was starting pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez, 17 innings pitched, 5 walks, 20 strikeouts. So the strikeout numbers are there. The control seems to be there, but he's just getting absolutely hit around the ballpark. Obviously, allowing almost a hit and a half every inning. Terrible and hard to do. Hard to deal with keeping runners off the base paths if the ball is just getting put into play over and over and over. So moving on, road to the show. Not as many debuts this last week, but 2 really big names that everyone should know. First baseman Josh Naylor made his debut on May 24th for the San Diego Padres. He's one of the best hitting prospects that really doesn't get a lot of play, that doesn't get a lot of attention. Part of it, I think, is the fact that it's the San Diego Padres. They've got a very good farm system with Chris Paddock, Fernando Tatis. Obviously, the signing of Manny Machado is huge for them as well this offseason. But Naylor hasn't gotten a lot of play as of recently when it comes to attention on social media or even in terms of prospect status. But he's a guy that's a really good hitter, not going to be a 40 home run guy, but first baseman turned outfielder, could play some decent outfield defense, and I'd like to see what he can do. And another guy that I'm really interested in is second baseman Cavan Biggio, obviously son of Craig Biggio. If you don't know who Craig Biggio, you need to look it up because everyone should know that name. I don't care if you know 5 years of baseball or 50 years of baseball. You have to know Craig Biggio, one of the best players that I got to watch as a kid. Kevin Biggio made his debut for the Toronto Blue Jays on May 24th. Hit his first home run in the big leagues this weekend. And it was an absolute just crushed ball. There was no way that was not leaving the stadium. So those are two names that if you guys are interested in, I'm sure depending on who it is, could be moved, could not be. But there's some young names to watch and definitely some excitement behind those names. Now, moving on, this is our new segment. I thought of it earlier today, had some time while the son was out playing with his friends here in the neighborhood on Memorial Day, MLB Power Rankings. And this will continue between all of the sports. I'm really hoping you guys like it. I think it'll be some fun because it'll be updated weekly. We'll show who moved and we'll discuss why. Obviously, some teams may not move. But this will be based not just on the standings, but also how teams played and against who in the last week. So I think it kind of makes for a fun new topic, something to discuss each week. And we'll always start from the bottom. So number 10, I think you guys can all guess who it's going to be. And it's going to be the New York Yankees. They come in at number 10 at this point. Not playing very well, have struggled as of late. A lot of it due to injuries of their team and recent performance. And that's the other thing we will do. We'll do the power rankings and then transition into the matchups, and we'll discuss why these teams are at the spots in the power rankings that they are. Obviously, New York Yankees dealing with a lot of it. Worst record in the league at this point, but also just the fact they haven't performed well. I'd like to see them get healthy and see what they can do because they do have a fairly interesting team. Coming in at number 9 is the Miami Marlins. Chris, I know you think your team is a top-tier team, but as of right now, you are sitting at number 9. A lot of your team has struggled, and there's a lot to go with your team. You've got some interesting pieces. I'd like to see what your team can do if everyone starts clicking, but there's definitely some moves to be made. You've definitely been very active on the waiver wire. I'm surprised you still have Jason Hayward on your team. I mean, it's Jason Hayward after all, but you sit at number 9. Number 8 is Kevin and his Houston Astros. I wanted to put him a little bit higher, but it's just Kevin's not super strong at this point. His team always plays really close games. I got to say he's been doing way better than I thought he would do this year. Obviously, I had him projected to be the 10th team in the league. I was wrong about that so far. So good job, Kevin, in proving me wrong. Number 7 is Chris Barnes and his Los Angeles Dodgers. You'll see how accurate it is, Chris. I'd love to see your take on it. Barnes and his Dodgers come in at number 7. Obviously, sitting in a tough division should be able to bump him up here in the coming times. I mean, he's bounced right around that 500 mark. I'd like to see him move up a little bit higher. Obviously, he may deserve to be a little bit higher than 7, but I'd like to see what his team can do. It's been fairly interesting ride for LA so far. Number 6 is the Minnesota Twins. And really, I probably could flip this with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Dodgers have a better record, but the Minnesota Twins, obviously, I think they haven't been as active as we'd like them to be. I know he was dealing with a lot of school and things like that. but he's got a very strong team. Obviously, Hunter Dozier has 11 home runs on the year with over a 300 average. Jorge Polanco has been absolutely on fire for the real life and fantasy Twins. Tim Anderson has definitely cooled off from the start of the season, but there's a lot to love. And the fact that Joey Gallo is somehow on the bench for the Minnesota Twins, if Matt can get his lineup set every day, or at least get his major players in there, he could be an absolute dominant force. Because if you haven't seen Joey Gallo at this point, he's hitting .277 on the season with 15 home runs and an OPS over 1,000. Remember, this is the guy that if everyone said he could find the contact, he would be an absolute dominant force. He has yet to hit above 210 in a full season, but he is at 277, and this guy has tons of power. So keep an eye on Joey Gallo. He's definitely fun for the Minnesota Twins, and he's only 25. So now into the top 5 we go. We will go in with number 5. It is the Toronto Blue Jays. They made a step up this week after doing what they did in their matchup. Definitely made a difference on where I statted them, where I put them in here. Definitely love what Steve's done, and it looks like his team is starting to turn it around. So I've got them coming in at number 5. Up. Number 4, I've got Jared and his St. Louis Cardinals. I still don't have a full read on what this team is. You've had bad weeks where they get stomped. Actually, let me pull it up. They've had bad weeks where they lose horribly, and they've had weeks where they've just absolutely dominated. I don't know how to feel about it. In their division, they're 23-23-2. They play in a very, very tough division. I'll give them that. But, I mean, you look back at obviously we'll get into this week's matchup, but looking at from the start of the year, or actually going back to week 1, they tied with the Colorado Rockies. Rockies are a great team. Then they lose to the Dodgers and only gain 4 wins. Then they beat the Atlanta Braves. Then they beat the Minnesota Twins. They lose to the Toronto Blue Jays. They beat the Houston Astros, and then they lost recently to the Chicago White Sox. They've had a very odd start to the year, but they still seem to have something going, even though they dealt from their stock of MLB talent at that point. So that's the St. Louis Cardinals coming in at number 4. Guys like Rafael Devers, Gleyber Torres are definitely carrying this team. Coming in at number 3 is the Atlanta Braves. I've kept up with his roster. A lot of it is suffering from injury right now, but the fact that you have the star talent in Christian Yelich, in Ronald Acuna, you've also got Anthony Rizzo, Carlos Correa, Rhys Hoskins. You've got the big names, and you've also got breakout candidate of Paul DeJong with 8 home runs and 4 stolen bases and an almost 300 average on the year. He's playing excellent as well. So the Atlanta Braves are a very strong team, and if we can get an owner for them, if Sean comes back, I really think this team could do some great, really good things. Coming in at number 2 is the Chicago White Sox. I would have loved to put myself at number 1 here, but with the way my team performed this last week and the way that it ended, I just couldn't justify putting the White Sox at number 1. So that means the number 1 spot belongs to the Colorado Rockies. They have absolutely trounced most of their competition. They did lose to the White Sox earlier this season, but for the most part, the Colorado Rockies have been a very solid team week in, week out, and they are a team that is tough to beat no matter what you do. So that's the power rankings for this right now. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you want to see more, if not, I'd love to see the discussion of it. So let's break down and show you why the power rankings are what they are. And mentioning that, before we get into it, I'm drinking a Shock Top Lemon Shandy today. I don't know what you guys are drinking, but one of my favorites, especially on hot days like this. So getting into it, we're going to start with the Miami Marlins because Chris Castaigne feels like he can call me out, say that the power rankings are wrong. But this is why I'm going to show, this is exactly why I'll show why the Cardinals are at number 4 and why the Marlins sit at number 9. The Cardinals absolutely stomped the Marlins, 10-2. Like we talked about, the St. Louis Cardinals have been a little inconsistent, but they've also played a very, very strong waiver play this year. They acquired guys such as Hernan Perez, who's been fairly decent. Obviously, Kike Hernandez was a great early pickup, but guys like Ketel Marte and Jose Martinez are playing well for them. Very strong plays by Jared at this point, doing really well. And unfortunately, Dick Lovelady was sent back down to the minors. He was optioned on Saturday. So, Jared, you'll have to get him to your minors at some point. You have an open, or you don't have an open spot at this point, but if you want to keep him, you know what to do. But Cardinals absolutely stomped the Marlins. That brings the Cardinals to a 51-40-5 record. I've got to say, I didn't expect them to be this high, especially dealing with the injuries of Justin Upton, Nelson Cruz recently, dealing a guy like Bryce Harper. But they've still got youth with Devers, Torres, Freeman, Bogarts. Ryan McMahon has been decent at times. But they've been able to pound out the counting stats. And you'll see that here. 69 runs, nice number there. 21 home runs, so they hit the 20 home run mark again multiple times this year. 53 runs batted in. Absolutely just dominant offensive week for the Cardinals. You could see they took every single category here on offensive side. No, not even close. I mean, runs was by over 20, home runs by 5. Runs batted in by 15. No, the Marlins didn't have a chance on the offensive side. They were at least able to take 2 categories on the pitching side, which would be walks allowed and then, surprisingly, whip. They could have taken ERA with a little bit more luck. The whip was such a difference between these two teams. Surprisingly, the Miami Marlins were not able to reduce the damage, though, and that's what hurt them in this matchup. Only 4 quality starts, only 4 saves and holds. I bet you Chris wishes he would have kept Kirby Yates at this point, but he did get some value out of it. So when it comes down to it, the Cardinals have got to absolutely love their team MVP for this week, and that would be third baseman Rafael Devers. And he absolutely just tore the cover off the ball. This was a top prospect for the Boston Red Sox at one point. Expected to be a really good third baseman, and this last week he went 13 for 27, almost a 500 average, adding on 2 stolen bases and 4 home runs. I mean, that was a line you would have expected from Jose Ramirez last year, and it's very similar at this point. 7 home runs, 7 stolen bases for him on the season, almost a 330 average. He's finally turning into the infielder that we expected him to be, and he's only 22. That's what everyone forgets about Devers. Now, for the Miami side, it isn't such a youth movement when it comes to the team MVP, but it goes to starting pitcher Clayton Kershaw. No one really stood out to me on the offensive side. No one had a fantastic week. I mean, there were guys that had power but didn't have average, maybe 2 home runs, but I really thought it belonged to Clayton Kershaw. And it's because of a 6 1/3 outing, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts, and a 2.84 ERA. Definitely helped fix the damage that was dealt by Caleb Smith and Chad Green and Jordan Lyles to that pitching staff. Clayton Kershaw was able to help bring down the whip, add those, prevent the walks, allowed the Marlins to not get shut out. Moving on to our second game. This would have been more fun if Sean was here, with the New York Yankees taking on the Atlanta Braves. And this one will show exactly why the Yankees sit in the number 10 spot in the power rankings. And that's because the Atlanta Braves absolutely dominated them. 10-2, same as the previous game. And a lot of it was just the fact that, let's see, actually, as I look here, okay. I mean, some of the actually fairly close, and we'll get into that here in a second. I mean, they played a great game against the Atlanta Braves. The scoreboard may not show it with only 2 wins on the week, but that'll bring the Yankees up to 26 wins, 68 losses, while the Atlanta Braves move above 500 once again on this young season. Now, I didn't think it was going to be this close. When I originally saw the score, I saw the Braves dominated in terms of wins. But when it comes down to it, it was a few lucky swings for them. I mean, you had JT Realmuto put up 3 home runs and some really good hits by players for the Braves, but it really wasn't that far off. Both power numbers were similar. The counting stats in terms of runs and RBIs are right there. And even the ratio stats were only off by 0.006 and 0.002. There's not a whole lot really separating these two teams in terms of offense. And it was surprising that the Yankees couldn't take advantage of it. There's some fixing to do on the offensive side. A lot of it, I think, was luck with the fact that you had Eduardo Escobar continue his hot hitting performance this year. I mean, you had Rhys Hoskins be very well, of course. DeYoung didn't do a whole lot, but this was a close matchup. And even though the Yankees dealt Verlander and Sale, they still put up a respectable ERA this week. 4.08, about league average. The walks were a little bit higher than you'd want with only 61 strikeouts. No saves and holds, but we knew the Yankees were doing that going into this year. That being said, the Braves are still a very good team. Hopefully Sean comes back. I would hate to replace his team, as he put so much love and stock into it that he did such a good job. A lot of these players actually panning out when I didn't think they would. So one person that I did believe in, of course, first baseman Anthony Rizzo, hit his 15th home run earlier this season, I think today. But he had 3 home runs, 10 RBIs this week with a 500 average, 14 hits and 28 at-bats. Could not get this guy out and was the main reason that the Braves won. You had key contributions from other guys like JT Realmuto, Carlos Correa, but without Anthony Rizzo, the Braves wouldn't have won this game so dominantly. And then on the other side, Gary Sanchez helped keep the Yankees in it with his 3 home runs, a 350 average, 9 RBIs, especially out of the catcher spot in fantasy. That is absolutely fantastic. The catcher spot has been an absolute black hole this year, and Gary Sanchez is the one little flicker of fire that gives promise to it. Moving on, we had a clash of titans here between these two. Barnes shows he knows what he's doing when it comes to rebuilding teams. He knows how to find the talent that he's looking for. The Rockies continue to show that they are an absolute contender after winning the league last year. Absolute stellar performance, and they showed it this week. They showed why they are the champion, still reigning, still defending, as they took 10 categories versus the Dodgers 2, and that moves them up to 65, 25, and 6. The absolute stomping they gave the Dodgers is the reason they are the number 1 in power rankings. Breaking it down, the only thing that really got away from the Dodgers had to be runs and the ratios on the offensive side. They couldn't hit the ball, and even if they did, there was zero power behind it. And the Colorado Rockies, just everything that came their way, they found a way to put the bat on it. And they had some great players, Eugenio Suarez, Justin Turner. Even if they weren't getting the counting stats, you had the absolute average, power, everything you could have asked for there. And then on the pitching side of it, this was, I got to give a lot of credit to Chris Barnes here. Had a pretty stellar week when it comes to it. 8 saves and holds in only 7 days. 4 quality starts, a little bit low in terms of it, but a very respectable ERA, a good amount of strikeouts, a little bit higher on walks than the Rockies. But the fact that they were able to outpitch the Rockies in terms of strikeouts and saves and holds is great for them, but they kind of ran into a wall here because of who they faced and when. It's going to happen. It happens to all of us. But the Dodgers had a really respectable week in terms of the pitching side. Maybe they're going to deal from that when it comes down to it. Maybe they hold on to the guys that they've had. I mean, Jared Eichhoff has been a big surprise this year, along with Griffin Canning. He's had ups and downs, but they've been able to add and supplant the holes that they've found. Obviously, the biggest one that wasn't a hole is starting pitcher Charlie Morton, who went 6 innings with 2 walks and 10 strikeouts. I forget who it was against. It was against the Cleveland Indians, who have been miserable this year. But the fact he was able to go out there and carve them up like he did, that gives him the team MVP for the Dodgers this week. And then on the Colorado Rockies side, you could make some arguments if you really wanted to, but this one absolutely belonged to Max Kepler this week. No doubt about it. 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, 10 runs, even added a stolen base in there with an average over 550. This guy has been an absolute breakout star this year. double-digit home runs already, 35 runs, 33 RBIs, doing everything that the Twins could have asked for in real life and then some. I mean, JD Martinez was worse than Max Kepler this week, which is a huge surprise. I mean, Max Kepler has outperformed JD Martinez in general. JD Martinez is sitting just below 300. His home runs are less. His RBIs are less. His runs are less. Max Kepler has been a big surprise for, I'm sure the Rockies didn't expect this type of performance, but they'll take it. I love what I see out of Kepler. Moving on, we've got Steve and his Toronto Blue Jays taking on the Chicago White Sox. Both South Side fans. I know Steve wanted the Chicago White Sox logo going into the season. Tough for me to give it up, so he stuck with his Blue Jays. And I got to say, he did a hell of a job crafting this team, and it took down the Chicago White Sox in Chicago as the White Sox walk away with only 4 wins on the week. The Blue Jays got 8 overall, and this was a good boost for the Blue Jays record as they now sit 4 games above 500 thanks to this matchup at 48, 44, and 4, while the White Sox drop down to a 67, 27, and 2. And even though the White Sox have the better record than the Colorado Rockies, the Rockies have shown to be a stronger team this last week, and we'll break it down with the White Sox and Blue Jays here. Really what it came down to was a terrible slow start for the Chicago White Sox, ended the week with only a .259 batting average, OPS of almost 850, which is very respectable. But the Blue Jays started off hot and remained hot all week. The power numbers may not have been there, but it didn't matter because they had more RBIs, 1 more stolen base, and an absolutely great 300 batting average on the week. And then you look at the pitching side of it. I thought pitching would have been my strength going into this year with the acquisitions that I made, but more walks allowed, worse ERA, worse whip, and the Blue Jays just took it. I mean, they played their ass off this week. They stepped up and knocked off the #1 team this past week. 3.32 ERA, excellent job there for the Blue Jays. A 127 whip, excellent there as well. A little bit higher than you'd want it to be, but still very, very good in a week span. 7 quality starts, which is great. And the team MVP for the Blue Jays, surprisingly, once again, is not a big name for the Blue Jays, but it belongs to Andrew McCutchen. The reason being, 2 home runs obviously wouldn't have mattered in terms of power there, but the 7 RBIs that he provided, 6 runs provided, and then the single stolen base along with an almost 350 average helped keep up and pick up for guys like Bryce Harper, for Will Myers at 235. Really, everyone on the Toronto Blue Jays just performed this week. And then on the White Sox side, team MVP belongs to, for once, not Cody Bellinger or Josh Bell, but to outfielder Juan Soto. Once again, hot hitting hand belongs as the team MVP. 13 for 26 this last week, 8 RBIs, 2 home runs, and a 1.418 OPS. Excellent out of the 20-year-old who had a struggling start to the year, but after this hot week has brought his numbers back up to what we saw last year. And then finally, this is the last game of the week, and this was the one that I told you guys to watch. This is the one that I thought was going to be interesting. I know the Minnesota Twins, both real life and fantasy, were doing pretty well recently, but I just had a feeling it wasn't going to be their week for fantasy. And boy, were we right, Chris, because the Houston Astros won 6 categories to 4 losses to 2 ties. And Kevin, I'm damn proud of you for it because you have brought your team where they are. They are now 36, 51, and 9, while the Twins sit at 40, 52, and 4. I mean, even with the fact that the Minnesota Twins have Byron Buxton and Nick Senzel, Hunter Dozier, Luke Voigt, all these offensive players who were still able to beat them and knock them off this week. And, I mean, the Houston Astros, you see that they were close in every single category here. Just such a great, great matchup between these two teams, these two franchises that both want to win this year. I know they do. Both had 21 home runs, surprisingly. The Twins took the advantage of scoring opportunities, a lot of it coming from Luke Voigt, Jonathan Scope, and the and other players of the actual Twins. And when it came down to it, the Astros had some luck bounce their way. Obviously, they took batting average by only a few measly points. OPS just wasn't the same, but still a very great week out of the Astros offense. When it came down to it, their pitching was able to be more stable than the Twins this week. Less walks, more strikeouts, better precision and control. So great to see that. And surprisingly, they had one more quality start from their pitching than the Twins did. And the Twins were one to buy pitching this offseason. The Houston Astros, though, can thank starting pitcher Lucas Giolito for that extra quality start. And that is why he is team MVP this week. And it was, of course, ironically enough, that one start came against the Houston Astros as he absolutely dominated them with a 4-hit outing, complete game shutout on Thursday night this week, and he absolutely dominated them. Struck out 9 batters, walked 1, and that's why the Houston Astros were able to walk away with what they did. Obviously brought down that ERA to a very respectable level. Didn't help the whip, of course. Didn't bring it all the way down of where you'd like to see it, but because of Lucas Giolito, they were able to walk away with a winning week. Now, for the Minnesota Twins, the team MVP goes to Eddie Rosario, a guy that has been absolutely just crushing everything. After a very good year last year where he batted .288 with 24 home runs and 77 RBIs, a very respectable year, he's already halfway to those numbers. I mean, this guy has 16 home runs, 45 RBIs compared to 77 last year, and a .285 average. He has become a really, really good outfielder. I wouldn't say a star yet, but has been a big piece of why the Minnesota Twins sit where they are, both in real life and in fantasy. So that's what we have for Week 8. Week 9 should be really fun. We've got some really great matchups that I expect to see a lot of excitement from. So starting off Week 9, we will travel to the Bronx Bombers, who played pretty well this last week. And once they get healthy, watch out because they will be a force to be reckoned with. However, I think the St. Louis Cardinals can handle them here in Week 9. The reason being the Cardinals may be inconsistent, but they found a way to win. And Jared has always been really good at that. He's been able to show the dominance that is needed at times, that extra special something. So give me the St. Louis Cardinals this week. Now we're going to move from the Bronx up to Minnesota, where everything has been on fire for the real-life Twins. And will that continue into fantasy? I'd like to think so. I mean, if Matt can hopefully get back here soon, I know he's been active. Not as active as he'd like to be. But if he can get Gallo in his lineup, it would be a welcome thing for him. But I'm still going to pick the Twins this week. I think the Dodgers are a great team. I think they've got some issues when it comes to the average and OPS, which obviously limits the likeliness of home runs and RBIs and runs scored. So I think the Twins should be able to take most of the offensive categories. If they can get lucky with some pitching categories, whether it comes to strikeouts or walks, I think they can walk away with a winning week. Now, we've got the Miami Marlins, who supposedly are a top-tier team, according to Castaigne. Whether or not, I think he needs to step up this week and prove it, because he's taking on the Toronto Blue Jays, who are coming off a high of a dominating week of the Chicago White Sox, played absolutely out of their mind on the road of all things, and now they come home to Toronto to play the lowly Marlins, who are sitting at 9th place in the standings. So as much as Chris wants to convince me of what he's got going, I still will take the Blue Jays this week. I think they have all the makings of a star-studded team. Obviously, an injury to Yadier Molina doesn't help. He's not in the lineup for Wednesday's doubleheader. Why is that? I mean, that was earlier in the week. I don't know why he has a red flag still. He's played before. So really, the Blue Jays are healthy. They've got a pretty good team going. Whether or not the Marlins can find some magic and find another winning week is far from me to tell, but they've gotten off to a good start so far with 9 categories to 1 loss at this point for the Marlins. Obviously still very close, but the Blue Jays are taking the route that the Chicago White Sox took last week of digging a hole early. Whether they can dig out of it, we'll have to wait and see. I think the Blue Jays can do it. Now, moving on to the commissioners, we've got the Atlanta Braves traveling west out to the Colorado Rockies, out to Denver to try and take on this famous Rockies franchise that won in their first year. I'll say I've taken over the Atlanta Braves team. I think we do need to make some additions to it, but even then, there's a lot of talent there. And as much as I'd love to see the Braves try and knock off the Rockies, I just think the Rockies are such a better and deeper team when it comes down to it. I mean, James McCann has been a very welcome piece. Even at catcher, he's not putting up gaudy counting stats. But when he's playing, he's hitting for a good average, good OPS. And sometimes you just need that to be steady. And that's why I've got the Colorado Rockies. They've got some holes in their lineup. Obviously, guys aren't performing the way they'd like them to. Lorenzo Cain only hitting .261. Jock Peterson is up and down with his average, but he's got the pop in his bat. With a .250 average and almost an OPS over 1,000, he is absolutely excellent. But the Colorado Rockies are still a great team, and that's why I've got them picked for this week, especially with all the injuries that they're dealing with. I think they can still pull this one off. And then we get down to the Lone Star State of the Houston Astros hosting the Chicago White Sox, a rematch of the 2005 World Series when the White Sox absolutely swept the Houston Astros. I mean, that was a fun World Series, though. Close and excellent throughout. That being said, I think my Chicago White Sox are going to have a fire lit under their ass after this last week, losing the Toronto Blue Jays and Steve. Unacceptable for this franchise. So I think the White Sox are going to come out. I think it's going to be a great matchup. And so far it is. Both teams hitting about the same. A 27 ERA for the Astros after only one out. But that is thanks to Craig Stammen, relief pitcher. That's easy enough to fix. But both teams, obviously the Astros have some power in their bats as they've got 2 home runs today on Memorial Day. One of them coming from Renato Nunez and the other coming from Albert Almora Jr., 2 of the most unlikely people that you would have thought going into this year. Renato Nunez being a great pickup for the Houston Astros, though. Third baseman out of Baltimore, 13 home runs on the year, and about one of the only players that are actually worth it in terms of fantasy use at this point out of that Baltimore franchise. Even with the hotness that the Houston Astros have been with guys like Dansby Swanson and, of course, like I said, Renato Nunez, I think the Chicago White Sox will find a sneaky way out of this one and pull off a win this week after having their first losing week on the year last week to the Toronto Blue Jays. That's what we've got for this week. Hope you guys enjoyed the power rankings. I'd love to see your guys' version of it. Obviously, Chris has an idea of what he thinks it should be. So I'd love for you to present it to the group, Chris. Be my guest. That's what Slack is for. The conversation is always there for you, always there to have some fun with it. So bring it on. I want to see your version of it. And it can't just be Marlins, 1 through 9, and then one last team. But I hope you guys have an enjoyable rest of your Memorial Day weekend. If you guys are playing with fireworks, obviously be careful. I don't want to hear about any of you going to the emergency room. If you do, at least make it interesting. But I will talk to you guys later this week. I hope you guys actually, since I have you here, I will bring it up since I don't think many people saw it. Oh, God, nope, not what I wanted. I accidentally did that. I accidentally opened all the tabs that I didn't want to open. There we go. All right, so I will put the screen back up, but I told you guys to visit the hockey and baseball leagues, and after finally finding some time today to do some work on them, I did finally put up the banners for hockey and basketball. I will probably end up editing the one for baseball because I really like the way these have turned out, starting with the football one with the league logo up top. But here we have the hockey one pulling up here in a second. Chicago Blackhawks 2019 winners here. obviously forever enshrined, forever once more, 2019, and it will always be the year that the playoffs occur. Rather than putting 2018-2019, I figure we go the same way the NHL does of saying 2019 champions belongs to the Chicago Blackhawks. Hope you guys love it. I like it. And if you look closely at it, that actually has all the team names in the background as well. Moving on to basketball, we have the header here for NBA belonging to Jared and his Toronto Raptors. First person in the league to win 2 championships in a year. So congratulations, Jared. Excellent job. Got your Toronto Raptors forever enshrined. Likely to be a tough team to beat next year, but we will get into that as the season gets closer. I'm excited for the draft, both there and in football. See what can happen. So those are the 2 things that I wanted you guys to see. I hope you guys enjoy it. Hopefully I can find something very similar for baseball, because as much as I originally liked the idea of doing stadiums, I think the way it looks there just seems to fit our mood a little bit better. If you guys don't think so, just let me know. I'll work on something else more. I would be glad to do it. But I will talk to you guys later. Keep those fantasy lineups rolling and enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend. Take it easy, guys.